This is deposition, all deposition today. I have a former CSR and a tape and then a qualifier.
I know.
So we're starting with this one and you know what, I'm defense one in the qualifier. So Candy, as I said, qualifier people always rule. Would you rather I be sitting there now? Because I can be with this. Are you sure? Otherwise, we're just going to flip flop right before the qual. Okay, good. I like that. Flexibility. That's good. Okay, so I am plaintiff counsel, Mr. Swanson.
I'm the witness.
I am attorney for defense one, right?
Shelby.
Shelby. Is it a Mr.?
Mr. Shelby and Judy, you are. You guys want to? Yep, Mr. Henderson.
Attorney for defense too, Mr. Henderson.
Sorry.
Okay.
So this is a construction case, I do believe, and I am starting, let's turn this into a ladder. So we're going to start in 15s. When we get to page 4 at the 4-minute mark, let's go up to 14s for a while. And then when we get to page 12, I can't really read what time mark that is. 13-minute mark.
I have the 15 here, so.
We'll do 15s, back down to 15s. Okay.
So page 12?
Page 12, the first time mark on that page, go back to 15s. So we're going to start at 200, get some in the middle up at 210, and then go back down to 200.
So starting at 15s.
Correct.
Okay.
Here we go. My understanding is that you didn't actually inspect the entire house prior to the sale. Is that correct?
You mean in the way of taking off light plugs to see if there was insulation in the wall or going under the house to look at things? Is that what you're talking about?
Other than just looking at the inside, did you ever inspect the back side of the house, actually go around back and take a look at the back side of the house?
Yes.
Did you see the white pipe?
Uh-huh.
Say yes or no, Patty.
I'm sorry, no. Mr. Dixon pointed it out to me, and at that time I looked down under the house and I could see the white pipe, yes, but I didn't discover it myself.
Okay, and other than the discussion with Betty Hatch prior to the sale, you didn't do any other follow-up regarding the white pipe?
No,
Have you had any training regarding inspection of houses, what to look for, that kind of thing?
no,
That wasn't part of your realty course?
no.
Going back to your discussion you had with Patty Bacchus regarding the system, she also indicated to you that the system had been approved by the county health department. Is that correct?
Right.
Do you feel that anyone misrepresented the nature of the septic tank system to you?
The nature of the septic tank system?
Do you feel that anyone misrepresented the condition of the septic tank system?
Well, yes.
You mean the physical condition of it? What kind of condition do you mean?
I'm sorry, first, do you feel that anyone misrepresented to you whether the septic tank system was approved by the county of Humboldt?
Yes, I was told that it was and it was not.
Okay, do you feel that there were any misrepresentations as to the actual physical condition of the septic tank system?
Misrepresentations? I don't think so. I mean, I was not aware that it was a failing system or anything like that.
Since the discovery of the problem with this system, have you talked with the Ingalls about this system?
No,
Have you talked with the Lockharts regarding this system?
no,
Now, my understanding is that you had been told by Betty Hatch that the system was legal, correct?
it was approved.
No, you're mischaracterizing the testimony, number one. And number two, you're going over the same questions previously asked. And I'm not going to have you repeat the deposition, go back over things you already covered.
That's true, but I do have an opportunity because this witness is being cross-examined to ask the witness, and I'm going to go into other areas besides just what Betty Hatch told her. I'm using that as a leading question to some other questions that I want to ask her.
My objection remains nevertheless as to the form of the question, because it mischaracterizes totally the response previously given by the witness on the same question.
My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Betty Hatch had told you that the septic system, tank system, was approved by the county health department. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That wasn't the question you asked a moment ago. That was my objection.
It was a good objection.
Thank you.
The best I've heard.
When this was told to you, did you feel at that time that this was a material fact which should be told to the buyers prior to purchase?
I'm just going to object for the record, calling for legal conclusions.
I join in that objection, but you can go ahead and answer the question.
Could you repeat the question again?
Sure. Did you feel that this fact, the fact that it had been approved by the Public Health Department, was a material fact which you should tell the buyers?
Oh, absolutely.
And this was because such a fact would be helpful to their determination whether to purchase the property or not?
I object. When you say whether it would be helpful to them or not, that calls for speculation.
Just so the record is clear, this last line of questioning where you're using terms like misrepresentation and material and things of that nature are all asking for legal conclusions. And I would object on that basis. Go ahead and ask your questions.
I think I'll let somebody else have some fun.
It's been fun.
I'll be back.
Maybe we don't have any questions. Then what are you going to do?
Well, then that will be it.
When you first met the Dixons, what did they tell you they were looking for as far as property?
They had a wide range of possibles. They wanted something that it didn't have to be in fantastic, excellent condition because Mr. Dixon was quite expert at fixing things up, and it didn't have to be extremely large. They preferred somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 square feet, but even that was a variable. They looked at property in Trinidad with views. They made an offer on a property in McKinleyville that had a really beautiful view. Mrs. Dixon's an interior decorator, and she has a real excellent eye for design. Very good taste. She would know it when she saw it.
Based on what you just told us, it would be safe to say for you had the impression that the Dixons were very sophisticated in real estate matters?
Oh, yes.
Object to the form of the question, vague and ambiguous. I move to strike.
Did the Dixons ever mention to you that they had previously bought some homes and made some improvements and then I would assume resold?
Yes.
Did the Dixons ever mention to you how long they intended to hold the Quarry Road property?
It seemed to me at the beginning of our tenure together that it was a pretty much permanent move. And later on, as time went by, it got to the point where it might or might not be a permanent move. They might find something else. They might hold it for a few years and then sell it, get something different that had kind of been their pattern, buying a place and fixing it up and selling it. So whether or not they were going to stop that or continue that, I really can't say. You know, there was nothing definite.
If you recall, what was the purchase sales price?
They were asking $119,000 and the Dixons purchased it for $103,000.
All right, now from your discussions with Patty Bacchus, do you know how much the Lockharts paid for the Ingalls property?
I think the Lockharts paid $119,000 and the Ingalls were asking $140,000.
Do you have an opinion as to why the discrepancy or differential there in the two prices?
Well, in this particular case, I felt that the price difference was justified because the property did need a lot of work. And indeed, after Mr. and Mrs. Dixon moved in, they had to replace the furnace, and that was quite expensive. It needed all the carpeting. The carpeting was totally destroyed by dogs. It needed work.
I believe you told us that during one of the early views or inspections of the property, you noted some type of odor. I would assume
Right, that was from the carpet.
the carpet. This was attributable to the pets in the house, that sort of thing?
Right.
I'd like to have these two files that you brought with you to your deposition marked as next in order. Let's mark it exhibit.
We're up to C.
Okay, let's have the file, which is Angle to Lockhart marked as exhibit C.
No, that would be D.
Okay, the Lockhart to Dixon is E, including the outside cover of the manila jacket as part of the exhibit. Now, with reference to exhibit D, which is Angle to Lockhart sale, did you have occasion to review prior to the sale to Mr. and Mrs. Dixon any of the documents in this file?
No,
Is there some reason why you didn't pull the file to look at it?
I felt satisfied in my own mind that I had the right information.
All the information you've gathered regarding this parcel of property and its eventual sale to Mr. and Mrs. Dixon was gathered from the multiple listing service and your conversations with Betty Hatch?
And Patty Bacchus.
Do you know if there is any information in this file that is pertinent to the sale, especially with regard to the septic system?
The only information in that file about the septic system is that Mr. Lockhart had requested a septic inspection and possible pumping prior to closing escrow on his transaction, and he waived that right later on.
When did you first learn of these two documents contained in Exhibit D?
I first learned of those two documents about 3 weeks ago when I pulled the file.
So the testimony is clear then, prior to the close of escrow on the Lockhart to Dixon transaction, you did not refer to the Exhibit D Ingle to Lockhart file?
No.
Okay, now with regard to Exhibit E, which is a Lockhart to Dixon file, there's some documents in there. First, we have a little yellow piece of paper with the name John Dolson, Health Department on the top. Is that correct?
Yes.
Let's mark this as E1. Can you tell me when this document was prepared?
Well, why don't you let her take a look at it?
Sure.
That was prepared after my conversation with Mr. Dixon after he'd received the letter from the health department.
Next is a telephone message here, which I've marked as E2. It says water meter break in line.
That's already Exhibit C, I think.
Septic and system and valve at front house. I wasn't sure of when this message was prepared.
This, I believe, is in response to my first inquiry to Betty Hatch. Typically, what I do is when I call on a property, the agent will tell you everything that they can think about that property prior to handing out the key. And this, I think, is my notes from that.
Exhibit E3 appears to be a receipt for $36 from the County of Humboldt. Can you tell me what this is for?
Yes, that was for a septic permit for the Dixons.
And I show you what's been marked as E6 application for individual sewage disposal service permit. Is that the application that was made for which the receipt was given?
That's correct.
Now referring to E4, a letter from Michael Bacchus, broker to Mr. and Mrs. Dixon. It states in part, Trinidad Realty has agreed to coordinate and assist in funding a repair on your septic system. Has the system been repaired?
Not to my knowledge.
Has Trinidad Realty funded any money for the repair of the system?
No.
Now, by use of the words assist in funding a repair, do you have any knowledge of what is meant by that in terms of how much or what percentage?
Well, Don Miller had designed this repair. It would probably cost between $1,500 and $2,000, and we were all going to split it without involving Mr. and Mrs. Dixon.
When you say all of us, who's willing?
Don Miller, Betty Hatch, and myself.
I'll say for the record, I'll allow you to go into this area. I think it obviously deals with a question of settlement of a dispute, which may be privileged. But for the purpose of the deposition, you may go ahead and ask your question, preserving my objection.
Is there some reason why this system that Mr. Miller designed has not been installed?
Yes, according to my information, Mr. Dixon's own engineer felt that whatever repair that was done to the property would inevitably fail. He gave a time period of 2 years. We couldn't persuade him otherwise.
Did the Dixons then decide not to go ahead with the repairs?
When I called Mr. Dixon to find out if we could go ahead with the repairs, he told me that they weren't going to go ahead with the repairs.
What did he say they were going to do?
Litigate.
So as I understand it, Trinidad Realty made an offer to repair and agreed to fund the repair. And Mr. Dixon said that he would rather litigate the issue than make the repair.
Right.
Objection. First of all, I don't know that this witness really was competent to testify. Competent meaning not the one who dealt with the issue. I think that was Mr. Bacchus who made any.
I'm referring to the conversation with Mr. Bacchus.
Okay.
If I recall your testimony a little bit earlier in your conversation with Mrs. Hatch, there was a discussion regarding the septic system, and it was suggested that you called Mr. Miller to learn more about the system. Is that correct?
Right.
And what did Mr. Miller tell you in this conversation?
He told me that he did not have any plans per se for the repair of the septic system.
And did you inquire of the permit?
He said that the owner would have gotten the permit.
Did you relay this conversation or the substance of this conversation on to Mr. and Mrs. Dixon?
I don't think so.
Is there some reason why you did not?
I guess it was because I felt satisfied in my mind that the information I had gotten from Betty was correct. She had had the listing for 2 sales, and I got the same information from Patty Bacchus, who had sold it previously. The house had been in existence for 20 years, and, you know, I just didn't think that there was any problem.
Would it be fair characterization of your testimony to say that you assumed that there was a permit for the septic system?
Yes.
You didn't know for sure one way or another, did you?
No.
Well,
Well, she has already testified that she was told.
I'll get to that. In your conversations with Mrs. Hatch, would it be fair to say that she told you that she didn't know whether or not there was a permit and that you should contact Mr. Miller to find out?
I'm going to object to that question as being ambiguous and calling for some kind of conclusion because you say, would it be fair to say that? I think you can ask her what she did say and whether she said something in particular or not.
I'll acquiesce to your greater knowledge, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Isn't it true that Mrs. Hatch told you that she didn't know whether or not a permit had been issued?
Object to the form of the question that it's compound.
Isn't it true that Mrs. Hatch told you that she didn't know whether a permit had been issued?
I really can't say whether or not she actually said that to me.
Did you make any attempt to verify with Mr. and Mrs. Engel whether or not a permit had been issued?
No.
So at that point in time, you are still unsure and we're assuming that a permit had been issued.
At that point in time, I felt that I had enough knowledge that I could assume that a permit had been issued.
On what basis were you saying that you were assuming that there had been approval? No one told you for sure.
Objection. Mischaracterizes the testimony. That's totally contrary to what she said.
Also, it's argumentative.
On what basis are you saying that you were,
She has testified that Betty Hatch told her there was approval. Your questions, which you know, refute that are contrary to her testimony.
other than Betty Hatch, on what other information were you relying at this point in time in your assumption that the county had approved the system?
I was relying on Betty's knowledge.
After your conversation with Mr. Miller, did you relay any of this information on to Mr. and Mrs. Dixon prior to the close of escrow?
What information?
What Mr. Miller told her on the telephone about assuming that the Angles had gotten the permit and so on.
I think you've already asked and answered that question. In fact, I know you have.
Did you tell Mr. and Mrs. Dixon?
You asked her that question.
I don't remember her answer.
The answer was no.
Your answer is no?
No,
Did Mrs. Hatch ever tell you how she knew or assumed that the system had been approved by the county?
she said Mr. Engel had told that to her.
Did she explain further?
Well, that was the substance of the conversation.
I've got to break for lunch. I've got a meeting I have to go to.
Okay,
You through with your questions?
I hate to have her come back.
I am through.
I have more questions.
You have more?
Yes.
Okay, we have to come back then.
You talked previously about the agreements after the sale as to how to resolve the matter,
Yes,
and you indicated that the parties had agreed to contribute to a fund to repair the property. Is that correct?
that's correct.
And who did you say it was that agreed to contribute to this fund?
Betty Hatch and myself.
Wait a minute. I'm going to make the same objection that Mr. Henderson did. I don't mind you going into it, but we want to understand that it is very possibly privileged because it is an offer of settlement. So I at least reserve that objection.
I raised the same objection.
Okay, was Mr. Miller also to contribute to this settlement?
Yes,
What about Mr. Dixon? Was he also to contribute to this settlement?
no,
In your answers to interrogatories, interrogatory number 11, I'm going to read it to you if you would like to follow along. It states, was Trinidad Realty ever informed that the septic or sewer system on the involved property complied with county code requirements? And your answer to that was no, correct?
right. Now, is that the one that there's an addendum to?
No, that's number 10.
That's number 10.
But you have indicated that Betty Hatch told you that the property did comply with the health department requirements. Is that correct?
No, that's not what she testified to. I object.
I do too, counsel. You're misrepresenting the testimony.
Okay, I'm sorry. If I am misrepresenting her testimony, what exactly did she tell you then?
She said that the septic system had been put in with the approval of the county.
But you differentiated that from telling you that it actually complied with county code requirements. Is that correct?
Objection. I don't know what time you're talking about. It's vague and ambiguous. You mean differentiated at that time or differentiated now?
Did you differentiate at that time between complying with the county code requirements and the county approval?
Yes,
And you did differentiate between the two?
yes.
Now, what did you see was the difference between the two?
Well, many times on a house that's 20 years old, you don't have a septic system that's up to code.
Okay, so you understood that even though it had been put in with the approval of the county, it might not be up to code.
Right,
And did you tell the Dixons that this property might not be up to code?
yes.
When did you tell them that?
I would have told them that in our conversation when I was finding out about the septic prior to the close of escrow, but after the first inspection.
You previously indicated to me what you recall of that conversation. Now, do you indicate that you also told them that the property might not be up to code?
Well, I can't exactly recall the substance of that conversation, but that would have followed.
Don't speculate.
Maybe I should, and I really can't exactly recall it.
You can't recall exactly. What can you recall regarding that conversation?
I don't recall.
Acquiesce.
Did I say
Stacy?
it wrong? Please, what I say?
You said
Acquiesce.
I know that word.
Did you figure it out?
Please. I have my own vocabulary apparently. Things just sort of come
You're
out.
like that, what's that comedian's name?
Oh.
Norm somebody? Do you know who I'm talking about,
No.
Judy?
I
He
don't remember
purposely
his name.
mispronounces a
Oh,
word.
does he?
Have you guys ever, what was his last name? He'd be
I
a
don't
really
remember.
fun person to play in a court reporting class. It would
You guys
be.
Was it-
That'd be a great
cracking
video.
Was he the guy
He was on a show.
on Saturday Night Live?
No.
Not
Norm?
that Norm.
Never
He's
heard
like
of him.
older than Saturday
Oh.
Night Live even, I think.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
We're
he's
aging
really old?
ourselves here,
Oh, he
sorry.
was
I don't know. It
Um,
was before our time.
anyway,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
what
he
it
used to be
was.
hysterical.
I don't know who that was.
He was
Okay.
in the Tim Conway era.
Oh, I was thinking
Yes.
of,
Yes.
Tim
Oh,
Conway's
oh.
Witness.
You don't know who Tim Conway is?
E1.
I know. who that is.
I sent my copy down there. Can I
Plaintiff.
have it back, please? Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, we're gonna do the CSR exam next. So actually, that ends our warm-up. So I'm gonna stop this and then start the recording again, but I won't lose those of you who are